Hi, this is Esther Kane with SeniorSafetyAdvice.com, and today we have a special treat. We are interviewing psychotherapist Amy Lewis Bear, who wrote this great book on charm to harm. It's about emotional abuse, and she wrote an article which is in psychologytoday.com titled "When Elderly Parents Are Abusive." And in that article, she talks about that topic as well as some tips for caregivers on how they can deal with this issue. We're filming this today, April 13th of 2020, and the US at least is in the middle of a lockdown, at least, most of the states. So the topic is very, very relevant now because so many caregivers are literally stuck in their homes with these abusive seniors that they're caring for. So what do you do? How do you manage that? So Amy, I want to thank you so much for being here and letting me interview you on this great topic.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity.
Sure.
And yeah, because I think this is a subject that's really not discussed much. And when I did some research on it, I couldn't find anything hardly on caregivers who were being abused by their elderly parents. There's very little on that. So I think that this interview today is very important for those who are really suffering through it.
It's true, and it's so fascinating because I belong to several caregiver groups on Facebook, and I see post after post after post, by the caregiver, like just screaming out for help, basically, on what do I do? What do I do with, the situation that I'm in, especially now since we're all locked in our homes, and where do you go? What do you do? So, so what are some of the things that you talk about in your article, on the topic?
Mhm. Well, I've first let me say I've had a psychotherapy practice for many years, and mostly I have been helping people in emotionally abusive relationships. Sometimes there's physical abuse as well, and so I have never really focused on or addressed that much with my clients parents who are abusive. So that's like a different area. However, a lot of emotional abuse tactics can cross over into any relationship at all,
Sure.
whether it's parent-child, intimate partners, boss employee, anything, and it's the same type of emotional abuse tactics. Except for, of course, there's some slight differences. So we're going to be talking about that today with elderly people who abuse their caregivers.
Right, right, because the component that's different, I think, in the senior population is the issues of, if they have cognitive decline, be it dementia or Alzheimer's, or, what other ailment is causing that kind of cognitive decline. So that, I think, is the one factor that separates this population from maybe a spouse or a sibling or whatever.
Well,
For
that's
the most
right.
part.
There's also the parent-child relationship, and it's a
True.
sort of a lifelong pattern of communication. Sometimes there are long-standing resentments, anger, hurt. It could be that the adult child caregiver was abused as a child, and there are a lot of unaddressed issues. And if both parent and child are carrying around some long simmering psychological issues and problems, anger, resentment, frustration, all of those things, that all comes into the caregiving relationship as well and complicates it.
Right, right. So I know you came up with an acronym, which I love, on the article. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, one of the things we do in therapy is we look at how my client is taking care of themselves, what's going on with them, what's going on inside their head, no matter what the situation is. And it's really the same with helping caregivers of elderly parents who are abusive. First, you take care of yourself. Take care of yourself. You got to check in with yourself and see what's going on in your own head.
Sure.
And that's really important. That's just generally a place to start. I have an acronym that addresses a number of elements of caregiving for an elderly parent who's abusive. So I came up with an acronym, SAFE CARE,
I
because
love
what you have to do, you're caregiving, but you need to be safe also, and you need to take care of yourself also.
Right.
So I can run down the acronym briefly, and then we can talk about it in more detail in the
Sure.
interview if you'd like.
Great.
Okay, so safe care. So the first word, or the first part of this is share what you're going through with other people. You can't handle this alone. It's too difficult. You need other perspectives. You need guidance. You need direction. You need validation. You need support. And so share what you're going through with other family members, with good, confidants, with friends, with religious leaders, with your doctors. Tell them what's going on and how you feel about it, because you can't handle this by yourself. That's the first one. We'll talk about that more later. And then the second part of safe care is accept that your parent's probably not going to change. Your parent has a lifelong way of relating to other people, or they could have some kind of cognitive decline, as Esther mentioned. And so they're probably not going to change. So it's you that has to change.
Mm-hmm.
You have to change. We could talk about ways that you can do that later. The third part, the F, is find community resources that can help. There are often and commonly resources in communities, be they big or small, that can help, and that are nonprofit organizations, and you won't break the bank getting help. There are a number of organizations that can help, and also research, retirement homes, home health care services, crisis services, and know which numbers to call and who to call when you need it. So you don't have to do all that research when something is a problem. You'll have that at those resources that are convenient. The other thing is safe. The E of safe is engage in positive conversation. Don't get hooked into negative, abusive comments and words and statements. What you're doing is you're just taking the bait, and it's the conversation or the interaction is likely going to escalate into a full-blown argument, and you want to try to prevent that. Now, I know it's difficult when you're angry and you just want to, take someone and your parent and shake them or say something to them, to hurt them back, but you've got to avoid that. And again, we're going to talk more about that later. The care, C and care, is check in with yourself, and sort of touched on that earlier. But you've got to get into your own head and know what's going on. Do you have frustrations, old resentments, anger against your parent? Are you handling them in the right way? Look at your own psychological issues, and have you taken time to find out or to determine whether or not you're contributing to the abuse or enabling it with your parent? So it's really important to know what's inside your own head. And then another one is avoid arguing and retaliating with your parents. Sometimes over the years, with the clients I've counseled, if they have an abusive partner, they end up going against their own personal values and their own previous choices, and saying abusive things themselves and being abusive themselves. But as the old saying says, you can't fight fire with fire. And so that just makes it worse. So avoid retaliating against your parent. It's just going to escalate the interaction, and things are going to get out of hand very quickly. You're going to make the situation worse. So the next one is recognize the causes behind the emotional abuse. Abuse tends to run in families, generation after generation, and so it's a learned behavior. And parent, possibly doesn't have good coping skills. Maybe you don't have good coping skills, and all that figures into an abusive interaction. So, as Esther mentioned earlier, there could be some cognitive decline. When we get older, when as we age, our brains sometimes, there's some cognitive decline, there's some deterioration. Could be the executive functioning that screens our behavior, that inhibits us, is declining. And so that can cause a personality change or a behavior change, where someone was previously agreeable and friendly and mostly, cooperative. Now they could be very different. They could be sort of regressing back to an earlier age, maybe more childlike behavior. And then the last one on safe care, the E, is embrace your own life. Be thankful for what you have. Enjoy what you have. Don't neglect your partner, your children, to take care of a parent who is demanding all of your time, because that's one of the points of taking care of yourself. You've got to know that you have a life too, and you need to live it and make time for it. So that's very, very important. So safe care, and we'll talk about those different elements some more in the interview.
Yeah, I love that you made those points, and they're all so valid. I know when I'm writing articles or reading information about caregiving, it's just emphasized over and over again how important it is for caregivers to take care of themselves first. It's the old story. You're in the plane and the oxygen tank, the oxygen mask comes down. You have to put it on yourself first before you can put it on them, because you're not doing anybody any good if you yourself are not in tip-top shape. So what's the point? But it's easier said than done. And I know that as being a caregiver, sometimes those little things can creep in and you don't even realize it. You don't even realize you're not taking care of yourself until it's almost too late, until you become ill or something happens. So I'm so glad you made that point. The first one, share, S for share. I know that for me, when my husband passed away, one of my friends told me, a year or so later, she said, Esther, I knew you were going to be okay, because you were talking to everybody about it. She said there wasn't anyone that you weren't mentioning to. And I don't know why I felt the need to do that, but I did. And I mean, looking back now, at the time it was just, 6 months of nothing but crying. But at the time, now looking back, it's like, oh yeah, now that I got my story out and I got it out, I could get feedback from other people. And even if they have nothing to say, at least they're there and they're supportive. And
yeah,
I don't know what it is about sharing, honestly, that makes it
well,
better.
they have their own stories too.
I guess
And when you hear other people's stories, you don't feel alone.
that's true. That's true. So that is very important to share. But I have also read, about caregivers who say that their families are tired of hearing them complaining about it. So maybe there's a little art to sharing it, not just constantly complaining about something, because in some situations there is nothing anybody can do. You just have to live through it. So yeah, maybe there's something to that, I don't know, but you're definitely right about
Sharing, and yes, I've heard that also, that I don't want to hear that anymore. That's all you ever talk about, about this abuse you're going through. But I think if you can sit down with someone, talk with them, and try to come up with some solutions, try to come up with some boundaries. Certainly,
Right.
you got to have boundaries against someone who's hurting you,
Right.
and you got to make some tough choices of whether you're going to go over to their homes. Maybe you have to cut back on it, because you do have to take care of yourself. If you don't, you're really not going to be able to provide very good caregiving for anyone.
It's true. It's true. And then you're a detriment not only to yourself, but if you're married and if you have children, all those other people around you.
Mm-hmm.
If you're working, everyone is going to be affected by that.
Yes.
So you're absolutely right. The second one, A, accept. That is so true about accepting your parent for who they are. That's true of anyone. People are who they are. So accept, the good things and the bad things about them. But I think as children, especially if you grew up I mean, at least in my case, yeah, I grew up with a very overbearing mother, and it wasn't good growing up. But um, I think to some extent, when you grow up in that situation and then you get older, you're still looking for the parent you never had. You're still looking for the mother to be the mother that she never was, or the father that he never was. But the truth is, they can't be. It's just not in their DNA. Not everyone is meant to be a parent. And they just have to, at least in my case, I just came to the realization they did the best they could and accepted that.
Well, that goes back to knowing, being introspective about yourself, and realizing what you just said, Esther, that I always wanted my parents' attention and never got it. So I'm still trying to get it, and it's a losing battle. And realizing it's a losing battle, and then you can take a different approach that's more effective, instead of beating your head against the wall, literally, in trying to attain something that's not attainable.
Yeah, it sounds like, from what you're saying, it sounds like the real solution or group of solutions is really to work on yourself. The caregiver has to work on themselves, because, I mean, you can't change another person. They are who they are. So you have to become more introspective. You have to realize what your trigger points are, and all that. You can only control yourself.
Yeah, trigger points are very important to realize, because what sets you off, something your parent says or does, and typically they know exactly how to push your buttons,
Yeah,
because they've been pushing them for a long time.
That's
So you got to
right.
figure that out, and then you've got to make a pact with yourself. When they say that thing that they say, or they do that thing that they do, I am not going to engage with them on that. I'm simply going to say, I'm leaving now, or I'm not going to talk about that, or eat your soup, or whatever you have to do to change the subject.
Right.
And
That's
just
true.
don't go there.
Yeah, they will. They will. All right. So the next one, F, fine. You're right. There's so many resources available today, and they don't have to cost anything. I mean, I've even seen some where some psychologists or psychiatrists have put together, free groups to join for whatever topic, anxiety, depression, whatever. Um, and they're usually in the evening. Yeah. And nowadays, I would imagine a lot of them are online, where you can go and see them. But I've seen, groups from churches and community organizations, in the area. What's that thing up here in the park? Community centers, all kinds of places where you can go and get, and then even amongst your friends, because a lot of us are in the age group where we are taking care of our elderly parents. So it's almost like not a mommy and me kind of thing, but it kind of is a mommy and me kind of thing, where the caregivers are getting together and conversing about, well, what are you doing? What are you doing about that?
Well, I think more and more of these organizations are going to pop up as the population ages. What was that statistic you were talking about?
Yeah, 10,000 people a day are turning 65, and that is going to continue until 2030. 10,000 people a day. I mean, that is such an incredible number. If you can just imagine that glut just it's like a snowball, just getting bigger and bigger. And for it to continue for the next 10 years, the baby boomers were really a massive generation.
Yeah.
But now that they're aging and hitting that, you're right, there's going to be more and more groups available. There has to be, just because it's needed. And even if it's not put out by a company or an organization, it can certainly be put out by a group of local friends or people.
Yeah, and thank goodness we have the internet now. We can do searches. I think the AARP, I think it's the American Association of Retired Persons, is a very strong organization. They have a lot of information, a lot of resources. It's a good place to start.
That's true. It is. It is. And actually, maybe at some point on my website, I'll put together a list of resources and I'll break it down by state for caregivers. Yeah, so look forward to that. It's something I can do while I'm sequestered indoors. And okay, good.
Yeah, that, but also organizations and resources that you would pay for, like
Right.
assisted living homes or just retirement homes, home health care services, where you can hire someone to come in and take care of your parent a few hours a day, depending upon the insurance you have.
Right.
Also, crisis services are very, very important. If an elderly parent gets out of control and they threaten to harm themselves or harm you, or they are the abuse escalates into physical violence, it's important to have that number ready for someone to call, emergency services to help you handle the situation. Because sometimes when the interaction escalates in that way and it's physically abusive, someone can get hurt, and that's not a good thing. So just have those numbers at the ready so you can call for emergency services if something gets out of hand.
That's a very, very good point. That's a very good point. And all that also, it reminds me of recommending to people the use of hospice. A lot of caregivers just don't think of using hospice until the very last 2 days or 4 days, whatever it is. But hospice is so much more. They have so much more to offer. The nurses, the social workers, the doctors, they deliver equipment, all that stuff. It can make the life of the caregiver so much easier. But on top of all of that, there's support there. The nurses are there to support you. The social workers are there to support you. You can talk with them. They've been through this hundreds or thousands of times. And I know the hospice nurse for my mother said that, she's had patients under her care for up to 3 years. So that's much longer than what most people use hospice for, and it's paid for by Medicare. So although I understand the emotional reluctance to call hospice, but the resources there are amazing. So I would definitely recommend that. That is another good place for.
That's good that you clarified that. I think also as far as research the retirement homes in your area, know the prices.
Right.
Know all the details. So if your parent gets very ill or gets to the point where they can't really distinguish reality from fantasy and get to a point where they really have to go into a home because it's dangerous to leave them by themselves,
Right.
then you'll already have that research done. You'll have a contact. Go and look at places and have all that prepared and ready, so you won't have that extra burden when you're dealing with a parent who you're trying to keep safe.
It's true. I mean, preparation is so important because then you can at least have those things done and you're not dealing with making those decisions while you're in a highly emotional state. Because, I mean, we all know no one makes good decisions when you're all emotional. So.
Oh, the other thing too is you better get your buy-in from your siblings and discuss with them. Whoever is in on making the choice, it's important to go ahead and discuss with them what you're going to do. Because if you do need to put your parent into a retirement home, assisted living, or even home health care, if you've got siblings, you've got to fight on that, then you don't want to have to deal with that as well. Some argument with your siblings while you're trying to find a solution for your parent.
That's true. That's very true. When you do have siblings or other family members, it does need to be a team effort. So, lots of planned meetings. Well, I guess if you offer wine and pizza, they'll come.
I certainly would.
Yeah. So, what do you mean by, or can you give us some more information on engage in positive conversation? Like, how do you do that when you want to strangle them? How do you do that?
Well, yeah, I know. I can understand. Sometimes you get to a point where you're so frustrated, you want to hurt them back and you just want to get them under control. And so the knee-jerk reaction is to do something that would actually be very unproductive and make the situation worse. So it's really important, and that goes back to knowing yourself and what's going on in your own head. You've got to engage them in a positive conversation. Don't even, you may have a way of interacting with your parent, sort of a behavioral pattern, a pattern of communication, call it, of negative communication that's been going on for quite a while.
Right.
And so those patterns are habitual. So they say something that sets you off, you say something, you set them off, and then it gets completely out of hand. You've got to stop that before it happens. And that also involves drawing healthy boundaries with a parent. If they start getting really very negative, calling you names, yelling, blaming you, accusing you, lying to you, then you've got to draw a boundary against that. And you can even say to them, "You're yelling at me, that's very hurtful, and so I'm going to leave the room now."
Yeah.
And don't try to engage in a conversation that's not going anywhere.
Right.
So there are ways to do that, and it has to do with setting boundaries for yourself.
Yeah, I know I did that a lot with my mother. My mother was very good about, putting us down. I mean, for whatever reason, it's just how she was, And so as she got older, that became only more so. I call that the more so disease. However you are when you're younger, you're more so when you're older. And in her case, it definitely was true. And she would play this game where she would start telling me all these negative things about my siblings, and then she would do the same thing to them. And she would pit us against each other almost to a point. And initially, when we were younger, of course, we didn't realize that was happening. But being an occupational therapist and having all these family conferences and seeing the dynamics of my patients and their families, and over a decade of that, I learned to kind of put myself from the outside and see in. So I could do exactly what you're saying, is to just walk away from the situation, because nothing good was going to come out of engaging and continuing that conversation. So it's almost like you have to pour cold water on it and just walk away.
Yeah, and it's really important in this situation to recognize the tactics that are being used against you. That's actually what my book is about, From Charm to Harm. And it's a list of, explains all the tactics that manipulative, controlling people use against their victims. So you have to be able to recognize those tactics. As I said, yelling, name calling, accusing, that sort of thing. That's pretty obvious that they're being emotionally abusive. But there are more subtle forms of abuse,
right,
that may have been going on for quite a while, like guilting. If your parent used guilt to try to get you to do something or control you growing up, then guess what? They're still doing it because it works. So you have to know when they're guilting you, and you can't feel bad about yourself, and you can't react by giving in because you're feeling guilty about yourself. Guilt is a very powerful emotion, and it can destroy your reasoning. When you feel like, oh, I should have done that, I'm a bad person, and that starts working on you. So you have to know when that's going on in your head. Another more subtle abuse tactic is manipulation. When they're manipulating you, maybe it's emotional blackmail. If you don't do this, I'm not going to leave you any inheritance. Or something that's even more subtle, like psychological intimidation, to try to wear you down, kind of break down your self-esteem, so you'll be more pliable. They'll better be able to control you. And my book, From Charm to Harm, lists, it's 75 abuse tactics, spells them out. So you've got to recognize what those tactics are, so you'll react in the proper way instead of just being drawn into it.
Exactly. And I do want to make the point that I don't think the parents, I don't think people who are abusive in that way are truly, they're not evil. I mean, for the most part, I don't think they're sitting there plotting, on ways to manipulate you or make you feel guilty. It's just how they were raised, or it's how they're thinking, it's their thought process, or whatever it is. I I truly don't believe that they are evil or mean. I used to say that about my mother all the time. She doesn't mean to be mean. She just doesn't know how to be nice. And
Well,
I
yeah,
believe
yeah,
that.
that's a good point because it is a learned behavior.
Right.
Whatever we do over and over again, usually something we learned as a child, we're going to keep doing it.
Right.
And we just, because we sort of get programmed and we don't even realize that we're doing it and we keep
Right.
doing it. And it all amounts to really poor coping skills, not really being able to handle a situation in an adult way.
Right.
Because maybe they threw tantrums when they were a kid and they got their way, so they're still doing it as an adult.
Right.
And you've got to realize when that's happening. And also, Esther, as you mentioned earlier about cognitive decline, as we get older, we may have some regressive behavior back to childhood. So an older person may act like a child
Exactly.
because that part of their brain that is, allows them to have good reason and good judgment is deteriorating. So you might see an abrupt change in your parent. I was my mother's 95 years old, and I've seen her go through some stages of that. She's okay. She has cognitive decline, but not dementia really or Alzheimer's. But nevertheless, I've seen her go through the stages of being somewhat abusive when she was, I don't know, probably in her late 80s, early 90s when my father was still alive. And then she sort of changed. And now for the past 2 or 3 years, she's just as sweet and docile as she can be. It's just unbelievable.
So did she change after your father passed away?
Yes, it was after my father passed away. And I'm not sure what really happened there because he was kind of the target of the emotional abuse. And
Yeah.
I think it was her frustrations coming out because she had always been so involved. This is another thing that's probably good to talk about. She had been always so involved in music and painting and piano and sewing. And she had all of these things that she used to do to keep her mind occupied. And when they moved into a retirement home, an assisted living facility, she didn't have any of that anymore. So she vented her frustrations by being abusive, saying mean things to my dad.
Wow.
And then when he passed away, I think it was probably a combination, no more target and also cognitive decline. She started being really sweet and docile. So
Well, so there's hope for some people.
yeah, they could change back. They could change back from being abusive to being nice. Who knows?
Yeah, I didn't get that from my mother. Yeah, that never happened. Maybe she'd live longer. I don't know. All right. So C, checking in. What do you mean by that? What do you mean by checking in?
Yeah, we sort of touched on that a little bit. It's really important to know your own trigger points. I mean, just write them down. I get mad when mom says this or does this. Write them down. Know what they are. So when they come up in real time with your mother or your father, then you'll know what's going on, and I think it'll give you more confidence to not let it get out of hand. So that's really important. It wouldn't be a bad idea. This is something I would recommend as a therapist to journal about your relationship with your parents. What happened when you were a child? And talk about the good and the bad, and really try to understand what your relationship was with your parents, because it's it's still going on. I mean, relationships are living, breathing entities. I mean, people change, relationships change, but a lot of what was happening when you were a child growing up is still happening in some ways. Write about your frustrations and your resentments and the ways you were hurt. And so you'll understand that when you're dealing with your parent, and you're not going to react with those emotions to your parent. Because what happens is that when we have a difficult relationship, all of the old resentments and the frustration and the anger that's not vented and resolved tends to come back into each succeeding interaction with that person. And so a lot of times the way you react is an overreaction to what was said or done, because you're feeling angry and hurt. So realizing those things, as we mentioned before, if you can get some counseling, some support, and support groups are great because other people share their stories, and you don't feel alone. You can learn a lot by listening to other people, how they handled it. And so, support groups are normally free of charge, I
Mm-hmm.
think, also, or a minimal fee.
Mm-hmm.
And so also when you're interacting with your parent, when you're visiting with them, uh, be prepared for what could happen. And then, figure out beforehand what an appropriate reaction would be. So you're not having to think on your feet about how you need to handle the situation.
Yes,
So
so
be
sort of like play
prepared.
the scene in your
Yeah,
head, and what would you say and do. It
yeah,
may also be helpful, I think. I know in my family, each of us siblings, there's four of us, and each of one of us has a different perspective of what it was like growing up. I mean, we're all years apart, I know, but still, it's interesting. We all grew up in the same house, but we all have a different experience.
it's usually the case. Yeah,
Yeah, so I think the journaling is a great idea. And I think sharing that journaling with your siblings, if you have siblings, or at least with others who were there at the time, cousins, whatever, and see what their perspective is on that story. Because sometimes I think we do, we don't remember everything, or we don't know everything that happened at that particular time. But I do love the idea, that you say of journaling. I think that's so important. All right. Avoid. Well, I think we talked about this basically is like not engaging, stepping back, and not making the event even bigger than what it
yeah,
is.
that's a really good general guideline, no matter what's happening
Yeah,
in your relationship with your parent, to
yeah,
avoid um, carrying on the same sort of negative cycle of communication, bringing in the resentments and the anger and the frustrations.
right. I think that's very important. And again, like you said, that's really all about knowing yourself and being prepared, and not just reacting emotionally or on the fly.
Yeah.
um,
Yes. Mm.
are recognize that is so important, because I think I've seen so many, as an OT, I've seen so many families just explode and blow up. Either the family, the children caused it, or started it, or the elderly patient started it, or whatever. But this person, the child didn't realize that the mother, is having this cognitive decline, and she's just reacting to what she's saying, and they're just not stepping back and realizing, okay, what's causing this? What's happening? And as we all get older, we start to lose control of our lives. We, physically, mentally, maybe your keys are taken away from you. You can't drive anymore. You're, it's too easy for some children to treat their parents like children. And who wants to be treated like a child when you're 85 years old? You've lived this whole life. There's all those issues happening that could fuel that, anger and frustration, where then they lash out.
Well, that's it. And some of the other reasons could be a stroke, or
Right.
heart disease. It could be some dementia happening. Just medical conditions.
Right.
Chronic pain is another one. If you're in chronic pain, it's hard to be nice when you're in chronic pain.
That's true. That's
Could be
very true.
addiction, substance abuse,
Right.
long-term addiction,
Right.
just all kinds of things that are causing people to act out. Also, we talked about the idea of generational abuse,
Mm-hmm.
which is something that really is important to look at and trace it back through your family.
Right.
Was grandma abusive? Was granddad abusive? What about my father's parents? How were they?
Right.
And you have an opportunity now to stop that cycle.
That's true.
Stop that cycle, because it runs for generations, because we learn from our parents.
It's true.
So
Whether you want to or not, you're
yeah, whether you
like your
want to or
parents.
not. Yeah. And
And
one of the thing too, just that it's important to point out, is that your parents, unless they are in a state where they can't distinguish fantasy from reality, you have to let them make some of their own decisions.
that's true.
If for instance, it's almost like harm reduction in a way. with drug addiction, they have a process or an approach called harm reduction. So you reduce the harm. It's not about cure, it's about harm reduction. So if for instance, they have a favorite food they like that's very unhealthy and they shouldn't be eating, they have heart disease or something, and they want to eat it and they're demanding to eat it, let them have it. It's their choice. They're an adult.
Yep.
You've got to know when to back off.
Right.
And allow them to make their own decisions. Yes, some parents act like children, or they regress into childhood behavior, I should say. But they may still be adults wanting to make their own decisions about things. And as Esther said, they lose control of a lot as you get older. So if they can make some decisions about themselves, I think that's going to give them a feeling of independence.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's a fine line for caregivers,
Yeah.
because they're trying to be the parent now. So they want to do what's best for their parent. But at the same time, like you said, their parent is an adult. So you can't treat them like they're 12 years old and, you're going to ground them and, take their privileges away or whatever. You can't do that. They're adults. They still have to have some control over their lives. And if that means that they're, like you said, eating unhealthy or, sometimes you just do have to let it go.
You have to let it go. Yeah. And so you have to look at one of the other things when you're checking in with yourself. What are you doing that might be aggravating them? Are you so busy that you can't sit down and talk with them and try to understand their frustrations, their opinions, their preferences, to listen to their life stories? That might be aggravating them. They might be angry at you for not seeming to have any time for them, except for just basic caregiving needs.
Right.
And so it's really important for you to look at how you're reacting to your parent and look at your relationship with them above all. Look at your relationship with them and try to be a friend and try to find the love in your relationship. Try to do something with your parent that they enjoy. Maybe they enjoy putting puzzles together or watching a favorite television show or something along those lines to really find some joy in your relationship.
I think that's so important. And actually, when I was working in rehab hospitals, a lot of times the patients would, even if they enjoyed doing puzzles or knitting or cooking or whatever, they didn't want to engage in it just because, whatever, you couldn't get them to do it. So what a lot of the recreational therapists would do is they would just do it anyway. They would just begin the project. And then eventually, not everyone, of course, but eventually then they would start coming in and start doing it themselves. So I would say the caregivers, even if they argue with you that they don't want to do that activity, just go ahead and start doing it anyway. And you'll never know. They may, just join in later. But all of that goes to the last one, embrace your life, because you're right. It's so important to find the joy in your life and to be grateful for the good things that you do have, a roof over your head, food in the refrigerator, friends to talk to, Murder, She Wrote at 11 o'clock at night, which I watch every night. So, whatever it is, be grateful for those little things, because it's all of those little things that give you that feeling of just feeling good, which everybody needs that every day.
Yeah, and the thing is, don't neglect people in your life, your partner, your children, your friends, your work. Don't neglect people who need you to take care of an angry parent.
Sure.
And taking care of an angry, controlling, abusive parent drains a lot of vitality and a lot of energy, and you have to try to prevent that from happening. So you'll have some left over for your own life and for those who love you and who you want to be with. You can cause some long-lasting damage to your other relationships if you spend so much time and energy and vitality with a parent.
It's true. I've read some Facebook posts where people say my fiance left me, my husband left me, whatever, because I'm having to take care of my elderly parent. And I mean, at the end of the day, what did that solve?
Right, exactly. And then in the end, what have you got but
I know, you
a
got
troubled
nothing.
life and a parent who's passed away,
That's
unfortunately.
right. That's right. I always thought it was a good idea to have a schedule so that the elderly person knows that at 2 p.m. you're going to come in and you're going to be with them from 2 to 5 and you're going to do whatever, have some planned something. It's
Structure's good, yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
structure is good because then at least that way they know. They're looking at the clock all day long. So at least then they know, okay, she's going to be here at 10 a.m. and then she's going to be here again at 2 p.m., whatever the schedule is. And that way you can schedule the rest of your life too around that. And even if you're living with that person, a schedule is a good thing. Obviously, it can't be kept every single day because things happen, but you want to try to keep it. I think. I don't know. It. I know that helped me with, when I was taking care of my mom.
Yeah, I think so. As long as you have it, so you can go back to it. It
Right.
may get blown apart by things that come up, but then you can go back to it. You have something that you can sort of as a foundation for how
Right.
you're going to approach caregiving.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. No, these are all very good points. I love your article. I think you did a great job on this very difficult topic.
Thank you.
I do want to say, to everyone watching that Amy does do virtual counseling. So the information to contact her is on my website and also on her website at amylewisbear.com. Is that right?
The my website is Heartwise
Oh,
Counseling.
sorry, Heartwise Counseling.
Heartwise Counseling, HEART,
Okay.
heartwisecounseling.com.
And then
And I do
also
phone and video sessions.
right, and so you can call her or email her and set that up, and she can help you, through this difficult time that so many. I mean, I knew that it was out there, but I didn't realize the volume.
Mhm.
And then on top of that, like you said, the lack of support and information available out there.
Mhm. Yeah, the thing is, when I was doing some research for the article, trying to find some images for my article, there was nothing, of course, on elderly people who are abusive. You don't find any images on that, but you find a lot of elder abuse images or just elderly. So I looked up just some images of elderly people, photographs, and they all look so sweet and dear. I
Yeah,
thought I can't put that with this article. And most of them are sweet and dear. A lot of them are, but there are some that are real bears and tigers, and they will hurt you. And so you have to really know how to protect yourself, even if they are your parent.
exactly. And without a study, without recording that demographic, we don't really know. I mean, are there more elders being abused or are there more caregivers being abused? At this point, we don't really have any numbers on that. So it would be fascinating if someone took that up and started doing that. But you do have to define, like you said, abuse and emotional abuse. Like you say in your book, there are so many subtle ways
Yeah.
that it can happen.
Yeah, that you don't even realize.
I
That
know.
you don't even realize it's happening, and you are being abused. You are being manipulated, and so you have to know that.
It's true. Well, Amy, I thank you so much for taking your time. I appreciate it. I know you're busy today, so I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day,
Thank you.
and maybe we'll do this again another time.
I would love to. Great. Thank you for the opportunity.
Anytime. Thank you. All right. Take care.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.